Hey, everybody. I just wanted to jump on for a second to say that the Dan Snyder apology was too much to be contained in one episode. So we're going to split it up into two parts. So if you get to the end of the episode and it ends abruptly and you feel like there's more, there is. It's going to come out next week. And it worked out pretty well because Joe Sixpack is going to be on vacation. So we had to have something to offer next week, but this was overstuffed. It was an hour and 40 minutes. So we're going to give you two 50-minute episodes, part one right now and part two next week. So enjoy this first half of the episode and come back next week for the second part. Thanks.
You shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize.
Stuff your sorries in a sack, mister.
I'm sorry! Congratulations! You've unlocked All Apologies, a show about apology tours and demanding satisfaction. I'm your host, Andy Q. Public, and with me, as always, is your co-host, Joe Sixpack. Joe, what's going on?
How you doing? I just watched the Wendy Williams Lifetime. Oh, I want to demand a fucking apology from Hulu. Like, I know that there's tiers, but I do pay for the service. I watched more commercials watching the Wendy Williams documentary than I did a documentary. If I would watch 3 minutes of a show and get a minute and a half of commercials at every, I don't know how many mid fucking rolls they've got going on Hulu. It's usually not like this. I can accept a commercial at the beginning, a minute and a half, halfway through, you get more commercials or something. I get it. This was beyond the fucking pale. Sorry, I'm shot out of a cannon here, Andy. Everybody, please go like and subscribe. Go to Patreon. Andy, you just went to WATP Live in Tampa, right?
I just flew in from Tampa, and boy, is my liver tired. We partied pretty hard for the last 3 nights and 4 days down in Tampa, and it was a great time. I couldn't be happier with the way it went. I got to spend a lot of time with listeners and the other personalities on the show, hanging out with Dr. Steve and Tukey and Cardiff a lot. The first night, the flight down, whatever, the peanuts and the seats and sitting in the whatever. I'm not going to do a Jim Jeffries bit about how
this is your hack bit about air travel.
Yeah. I'm not going to say how bad the flight down was, but it was good. I have my opinions about air travel. I don't like it, and I think it's poorly run, but it was good for this trip. And we get down there, and there's our Airbnb is just kind of like peppered in among a million trailer parks. You drive by one trailer park, and then you're in kind of a modular home neighborhood. Then you drive by another trailer park, and then you're in a more realistic neighborhood. And among all of these ramshackle neighborhoods was our Airbnb. It was the trick is that we have a lot of people that are staying there. You got Lucy, Chris, Jenny Jingles, Carl, I'm there, Vinny's there, and Tukey. We're all staying in the same place. So the real trick is having enough space for everybody to be there, because it turns into sort of like an Upwork fraternity house while we're putting the show together and just doing all of the substances, So it's hard to find a place that will accommodate that. And it was just in the middle of, it was kind of like a little further removed from the venue and where a lot of the other people that were there for the event were. But there were peacocks running around the neighborhood. We were like, open the door in the morning, and there's just wild peacocks meandering around the neighborhood. So that was cool.
Yeah, I saw Jenny Jingles Instagram with the peacocks. Yeah.
Dr. Steve had a story about when he was in his 30s or something, that they had to like cull the peacock herd, and he was hunting bow and arrow with peacocks and eating peacocks, and he was
And
just
drinking their fluid.
yeah. So he had so many great stories, and he was cracking us up last night after the event. But the second night we went to Hulk Hogan's bar, and a lot of familiar faces were there. Plenty of listeners. I'm not going to bring up a lot of names because I don't want to leave anybody out. But tons of people just came up. Everything. People showed up for the night before get together. People were there for the event, and then people were there for the after party. Lots of people at the meet and greet. B Dabbler's channel has a live stream of the meet and greet. You could see a lot of what went down there on his channel right now.
Cool.
And I think it's Cardiff. They probably both have it, but Cardiff and Tukey did a straight kids stuff in response to the queer kids stuff segment.
Okay.
And that
what's that? Just fucking Call of Duty streaming?
Yeah, it's just Cardiff beating off on OnlyFans. No, it's a great package, and it was probably one of the highlights of the show. And we did Royce and Mersh from Revenge of the Sis killed it. They were on with Top Lobster, who those guys. You are kind of like, what could possibly happen? You never know, like how hard they're going to go in the paint with some of this stuff, especially queer kid stuff. But they were all hilarious. It was great.
I did see the WATP segment with the ROTC guys, the fighter and the kid stuff, the Brendan Schaub, the Golden Hour, and the fighter and the kid stuff. So I thought that was fun with Vinny. Yeah.
It's like fish in a barrel, making fun of D'Elia and Eric Griffin, Schaub. So that was all fantastic, as Tukey would say. And then after that, we went to like a Bills backer bar that had karaoke, and like everybody from the show came to that, and just got to hang out and chat with everybody there. And Florida, everything is reasonably priced. All the food and drinks were that you get the bill at the end of the night and you're like, oh, that's it, I should have drank more. But we're just drinking constantly.
It wasn't $8 beers.
No. And then the last night we went down to back out to Clearwater, and we shot some of the video for Lucy's double date with band practice guy and Jerry. So Vinny directed and produced, and Dr. Steve and I were cameramen, and we shot a lot of footage of that
when you say double date, it's Lucy dating two guys at the same time, right? There's not two couples like on a date.
Right. We were pitting them against each other for Lucy's affection.
Fight.
Yeah. And the weather ended up being a lot better than, we were monitoring the weather the whole time, wondering if, it was like, maybe it's not going to be that nice. What can we do if it sucks out? But it ended up being like really beautiful, and a lot of spring breakers, a lot of young ladies running around with their bathing suits jammed up the crack of their ass. So that was nice.
Like, you ladies want to be in a video?
Yeah. You want me to make you famous?
You ladies want to meet Dr. Steve?
Pussy magnet Dr. Steve. Yeah. So I had nothing but good things to say about the whole event.
I think I was watching Who Are These Socials, and Carl was shooting it outside or whatever. It started raining. He had to switch what he was doing because it started to rain on him.
He had to run.
That was. So I hear what you're saying about the weather.
Yeah, he didn't want to melt like a wicked witch.
All of his foundation from the makeup that he wears to be on camera would have washed off.
Yeah, his dye job from his tips is like running down his face like Rudy Giuliani.
His Just for Men is dripping down his face. Yeah. That's
But
good.
Tampa's a beautiful city. Clearwater's a pain in the ass to get in and out of. You have to go over this long bridge, and then it dead ends into this roundabout that nobody seems to know how to navigate. But once you get out there, really nice.
Did you
Not
go to
very
the Did you go to the
Scientology.
Walmart on Dale Mabry?
No, we didn't go to the patio where Chad Zumach got beat up. We wanted to do that,
Were
but
Were you gonna go to the parking lot where Chad was stealing catalytic converters?
yeah, no, we didn't do the Chad Zumach tour, but Vinny and Tukey were trying to do the Fez Watley tour of Tampa,
Mm.
and it just it's got to be too much Ubering for.
Fez was from Tampa.
I
Is
guess
that
I don't. Those guys are diehard Ron and Fez fans. I'm not super familiar, but they wouldn't shut up about wrestling and Fez Watley for 3 days straight. Those two.
I only know Ron and Fez. Really, I mean, I was familiar with the show just in name only, really, and then I listened to Blind Mike, the Why Are You Laughing on Ron and Fez.
Oh, okay, I should watch that.
And so Fez being a pretty tragic figure or whatever. So that's really my only reference for it. But that's a good episode. If I can plug Why Are You Laughing, as we are wont to do. It was
Always
very,
want to do.
yeah. I think I've heard Blind Mike talk about it before of like you never know if people are interested or whatever. I can only provide my feedback, which is I am interested in that. It was not like a show that I was really tuned into at the time. And I kind of feel like I missed out on it in some way. Like Ed will talk about, Opie and Anthony and then Ron and Fez and things like that. And yeah, I never really knew much about it. So being able to listen to Why Are You Laughing and catch up on some of those things that you may have missed, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I was saying something similar. I used to get all of my Opie and Howard listening done while I was working and driving in the truck, and Ron and Fez kind of came on after the workday was over, so I didn't stick around for that portion of the day, so I'm not super familiar with it. But I'd love to hear Why Are You Laughing roundup of that.
Mm-hmm.
People that were fans seem to be big fans of it, and I'll offer the apology. It's been a long weekend. I didn't really get a chance to pull up any of the what you call it. Way to go, dude! But we'll have a double wide segment of it next time. So my apologies for dropping the ball on that. But in the meantime, let's get to the main segment.
Sorry, who's that?
So this week we're talking about Dan Schneider. It's Dan Schneider, right?
Dan Schneider, yeah.
And he was the Uber producer of Nickelodeon Kids Television back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, or all through the 90s probably. But it kind of deteriorated into a lot of workplace misconduct / kids getting molested. Not to bury the lead, but there was a hotbed of misconduct there that we're going to dive into. But I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Like I said, my apologies. Joe put together this whole package for us, and he's going to basically. I did get a chance to watch the whole docu-series on
You
HBO.
did,
and I went through your clips, so I'm not familiar with his interview proper so much. But you can explain all that to me. But I know all of the context of what they're talking about.
Good. Okay, that helps me at least navigate some of this, because part of my criticism with the documentary was that it kind of conflates who Dan Schneider is with just atrocious pedophiles, like in general. I mean, they were in the mix, but you can't kind of pin that all on Dan Schneider. And it kind of, not that they do that, but it plays it up as if, you can blame every pedophile on Dan Schneider.
Yeah.
So
They're trying to say that he was such a taskmaster and maybe not the most woman friendly person to work for, and that is all tantamount to not having pedophile detecting technology to weed out all these people. I mean, if your business is having a lot of kids around, pedophiles are going to try and figure out how to be part of that.
yeah,
And beating
My-
them out is not Dan Snyder's job, but that
right,
doesn't mean that he's a good person, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean that that's his job.
right.
And that was
Like
kind of my
let's
takeaway from the second half of this docuseries.
right. Let's compartmentalize this just a little bit, okay? The whole thing, children's programming on Nickelodeon, is just by the nature of the beast going to attract pedophiles and be the stomping ground of potential pedophiles and stuff. So you would think that there would be I would be, if I was in the HR department of Nickelodeon, I would every day I would be like, as people were walking in, I'd be like, "Are you a pedophile? Are you a pedophile? Are you a
Yeah.
pedophile?" It would just be nonstop pedophile hunting, as far as I can tell. So what that's the other maybe thing part about the documentary itself. What we don't ever find out really is how many pedophiles they actually caught and dismissed, and before anything really happened, or like they never made it around. We only focus on the
I need
what
to know how many they didn't catch.
well, they tell us how many they didn't catch in the documentary.
I
That's what
mean,
that's
that's only the
about.
ones they know about, is what I mean.
Yeah, these are the only ones that we know about, right? So there's part of that. So, but we're here to talk about Dan Schneider's 20-minute apology video for what really it's so odd, because it's not so odd, but because of the nature of it, and you say Dan Schneider documentary pedophile or whatever, like it just makes him sound like he's like the central figure of this pedophile ring, like a QAnon Pizzagate pedophile ring, and Dan Schneider's running it.
That's what
Um,
everybody thinks Hollywood is, right? I mean, it's Corey Feldman's Wolf Pack.
it's that part of the documentary felt very Corey Feldman to me. Like,
It backs up everything Corey Feldman's been saying.
for sure, for sure. And I think maybe what it is just the general public being like shocked at the fact that children's programming would attract pedophiles or whatever. Anyway, let's set the stage a little. I'm sure we'll talk about this all as we go through these clips. So,
Joe, I threw
Dan
I
Schneider.
threw a fishing lure into the lake and I caught a fish. I'm so shocked that I was able to catch a pedophile with children running around everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I was dangling eager children, who were desperate for any attention in front of pedophiles, and we caught a bunch. So Dan Schneider really was the mastermind of Nickelodeon, and not very young children, because Nickelodeon does that programming as well, but like preteen, 9, 10, 11, 12, like that type of age. And then also they had like their teen Nick stuff. Like there's all kinds of kids programming here. The one thing I want to point out about Nickelodeon in general, or this style of show, is that Nickelodeon made their bones on, like, you can't do that on television. Okay. This was a show, this was gross out humor, right? At the time, you had Barth like running the diner, picking his nose, digging shit out of his ear, and then handing you a hamburger that looked like it was a pile of dog shit. And all the kids were disgusted by this adult, right?
I went to a
then they
couple of
poured,
restaurants like that in Tampa. The
and
Glory
then
Days, the Glory Days Cafe.
and then they pour like green slime, and the green slime has evolved over the years to be cleaner, smoother, but in like, you can't do that on television. It was just like a bucket of shit that they poured on everybody. It was disgusting. The show was disgusting. I want to make it clear that Nickelodeon built their whole empire on this kind of gross out humor that was very like Garbage Pail Kids adjacent. It was like the same vibe.
Ren and
Okay.
Stimpy used
Ren
to
and
have those
Stimpy.
glamour shot close-ups that were,
Right.
Stimpy's boogery nose
Right.
or Ren's toenails, and it was like a shock value.
And I only want to bring that up because we will get into essentially the debate of, well, what's funny and what are jokes. And I just want to set the stage that this wasn't like a foreign thing, like a foreign concept to Nickelodeon before we got to Dan Schneider. Okay. So Dan Schneider is responsible for, what was it? All That, I think was the name of the kids show, which was kind of supposed to be like a Saturday Night Live for kids, right?
Correct.
He
And
got very
Kenan Thompson came out of that and went on to
Keenan and Kel.
Young
There's
and
big
Real Saturday Night Live.
Ariana Grande and Keenan Thompson are probably some of the biggest names that came out of this world. Okay.
Guess who didn't show up in the docuseries to shit all over Dan Schneider? Kenan Thompson and Ariana Grande and Victoria Justice. All these people that went on to bigger, better things didn't come down to shit on this guy.
I literally just before the show, I was watching. There's no shortage of content on this topic right now, and it was Victoria Justice's statement about, oh well, this Victoria Justice isn't saying anything, and she's just like, yes, 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 like yes to that, yes to that. But really, what it boils down to is, even if you wanted to defend Dan Schneider's in some way, that would be unfashionable. People are taking her silence as a cosign to she agrees with everything. Well, that might be true, but also the opposite may be true. She might not be like, it would be unfashionable for you to be like, I'm going to side with Dan Schneider here, and I will at times side with Dan Schneider as we go through this,
and I won't sometimes.
There's times where I clearly won't, but I'll make that very clear. So Dan Schneider, All That, the Amanda Show with Amanda Bynes. He was part of like Good Burger, I think, either the movie or the show. Maybe he was an executive producer, but he may have helped write that stuff. So those are big shows. Sam and Cat with Ariana Grande and Jeanette McCurdy, I think her name was, and she had a whole book about how horrible working in the industry was. And then iCarly, right, are kind of like the big show, like Dan Schneider's big shows. All right, these
don't forget Drake and Josh.
Oh, Drake and Josh, obviously. Drake and Josh. These are big shows. Like, to have a track record like this is impressive. I think that should at least be said. So I think people put unneeded pressure on these things, but like you'll hear them talk about the pressure of this at times or whatever. But I'm like, I don't really know what the space is of this. It's children's programming. Like, you're really only competing with Disney. How pressurized can this possibly be? Anyway, so this documentary about all of those shows that I just mentioned comes out, and it's just, oh my God, Dan Schneider was a monster to work for, and he did this and he did that and he did this. And also, by the way, there was a lot of pedophiles running around that, we just couldn't seem to get a handle on. And that's the documentary that came. It's a 4-part documentary. 50% of it focuses on what a dickhead Dan Schneider is, and then 50% of it is about
Drake Bell getting molested.
Right. So we'll get to that shit. So let's start off so Dan is watching the documentary. What I think is important to point out here is like how staged this all is. The interviewer is, I think his name's Boogie. I don't know if that's what his name was on the show, but he was on iCarly. He was an actor on the show when that show was big, and he's interviewing Dan Schneider about this. So clearly it's all been set up. They knew this documentary was coming out, and they're trying to get ahead of it. And Dan is going to confess and apologize for all of the banal shit that really doesn't matter, right? Is how this comes off. Let's get ahead of it.
Last 2 nights was very difficult. Me facing my past behaviors, some of which are embarrassing and that I regret, and I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
Dan regrets his behavior now, right? This is like convincing the parole board that you don't care about the production, sale, and consumption of sweet, sweet crystal meth anymore. Okay? It really doesn't matter. I think it's also important. I don't think I mentioned it here, and I'll mention it up front. Dan was asked to leave Nickelodeon, and they paid him $7 million to leave, basically. So he took his golden umbrella and fucked off to the Hollywood Hills or wherever he now resides with his wife.
I got
And
Dan Harmon vibes from this description when they were talking about Community and just what it took to put up with him being the showrunner, and his demeanor on set was
yeah.
seemingly bipolar.
That you say that, I think that's a fairly apt comparison. The other thing that I think, if Me Too had come along sooner, or maybe this was on the cusp or right at Me Too, had Dan Schneider been surrounded by more adult women, I think he would have been canceled a lot quicker.
They do start out the show with all these former writers and journalists. There's one woman. There was two journalists that were taking him to task in this, and the blonde woman seemed to be a just the facts ma'am type of reporter, and then the woman with the hand tattoos, it seemed to have an agenda that only revolved around looking at the past through the 2024 lens of Me Too.
Yes,
And
100%.
I found her very annoying, and always having these sum ups that ended with broad generalizations about the patriarchy that didn't really have anything to do with what was going on. So I found her very annoying. But what was really clear was that Dan Schneider he's been a fat kid his whole life, and he probably never had a real girlfriend when he was the age of all these girls that are in all of his shows. And now he's a big, powerful executive, and he's kind of swinging that power around and not being very subtle about asking people to just come up and give him massages in his director's chair. I was just like making women whose job it is not to massage Dan Schneider come and give him massages. That's pretty egregious. I mean, it's not like he's jerking off in a plant in front of him, but that's inappropriate behavior.
And I have a little bit more about that later too. It's hard to say like the phases of this, like the female writers, which we're going to get to here in a minute as well. That's one phase of Dan Schneider being kind of a dick, right? When Dan Schneider's asking the hair and makeup ladies to come massage him, that's like God mode Dan Schneider, who's he's like, this is the level I'm at, and if you don't like it, then fuck off. He's 100% guilty of being a dickhead, like a misogynist. Even at one point they show with those female writers, then they show like the new writers' room at one point, and I think it was even like for iCarly, it's just all dudes, like all white college dudes, like talking about like a teenage girl's show. So that maybe a little tone deaf, like we've kind of had these things. But yeah, I think a lot of this is, this guy was a prick, and we're not going to let him get away with it. He's not going to slip through the cracks without us creating a 4-part documentary about what a cocksucker he was. And you're right. The blonde woman was very fact-based. That's my biggest complaint with this, is they leave a lot of it up to, they start like mining the past to create a narrative. And I'll get into a little more of that as we go here. Dan says that some of this was embarrassing.
Oh, it was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. It was the wrong thing to do. I'd never do it today. I'm embarrassed that I did it then. I apologize to anybody that I ever put in that situation. And even additionally, I apologize to the people who were walking around Video Village or wherever they happened, because there were lots of people there who witnessed it who also may have felt uncomfortable. So I owe them an apology as well.
Yeah, that is about the shoulder, rubbing his shoulders, right? He's talking specifically to that. Now, to be fair, a quality massage is going to run you about $190 plus about a $50 tip. So making your subordinates half-ass it for free is just fiscally responsible. Massaging this guy must have been like rubbing down a beanbag chair full of gravel after a homeless guy pissed on it. Like, nobody wants to do that. But look at him. Like nobody wants to do that. If he can force people to touch him, he'll do it. Like that's how that came off.
Yeah. I apologize to people in Video Village that had to see that. I apologize to the person that delivered the Starbucks that walked in and saw that happening. I apologize to anybody that happened to be passing by and saw a woman touching me. He's just apologizing. Apologizing to anybody that ever had to look at him.
Yeah, I'm apologize. Anyone had to see me in any type of sexual situation, no matter how clothed we may have been.
There's a class action lawsuit for every woman that's ever had to lay eyes on him.
Yeah. So in this next clip, we're going to talk about the female writers, and there's a lot of setup. Dan responds to it. We have a couple of clips about this writer's situation. So this is called the writer's room, and what I had to say here was fuck these losers.
Writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room ever. Period. The end. No excuses. Most TV writers, comedy writers have been in writers' rooms, and they are aware that a lot of times there are inappropriate jokes made and inappropriate topics come up. But the fact that I participated in that, especially when I was leading the room, it embarrasses me. I shouldn't have done it.
A writer's room should be like a podcast description, Andy. Is anything off limits? No. A writer's room should be nothing but inappropriate jokes, right? You distill down the inappropriate and figure out how to make it appropriate for children. Creativity should not be stifled in a writer's room. Okay. Yeah. So things may get a little fucking dicey, and they did. I think what we found out is Dan Schneider was misogynistic. He was desperate for women to touch him. The shit was going to get sexual. They tell a story about like the one, the one attractive, the one that doesn't look like, a bag of hammers, doing running through some soliloquy while she's like taking it from behind or whatever. And like they tell this story or whatever. Now, also keep in mind, the woman that they're talking about that he made do this or wanted to do this, she went on to she writing for Family Guy and Modern Family, having a brilliant career. The fucking Miss Piggy lookalike never worked in Hollywood again because she kind of like blew the whistle on it. So the story goes. But I looked up their credits. Yeah, the one, slob has done nothing, and the semi-attractive one has gone to have a lucrative career in writing.
Well, maybe she didn't want to do anything after having to deal with that guy.
No, I'm sure. Or I do 100% believe that Dan Schneider and Brian Robbins have 100% the ability to blackball her out of the industry.
I mean, they said that he would make threats like that. So he probably did.
I don't doubt it for a second. I'll defend the writer's room shit. Okay. That's going to go however you want it to go. The guy's trying to create, how fucking hard it must be to come up with concepts that are okay for children to like, and to have it be funny. The mental gymnastics that you have to do to create a show like this must be tremendously annoying, as far as I can tell. You're already operating with one hand tied behind your back, trying to create for a younger audience. It's going to be scrutinized, and we'll get into that a little bit too.
I know every joke can't just be, I had diarrhea in the bathroom. That's like, and what my 8-year-old nephew, if all you have to do is say diarrhea in a toilet, and he loses his mind and thinks it's the funniest thing. But That's not a show. This isn't a show. It's not a show. This isn't a show.
Yeah, do a show about diarrhea for 7 years. See how far you get. In our next clip here, so I call this No Such Thing, and let's stifle ideas in the writer's room, Andy.
Writer's room, there's no doubt that sometimes those jokes went beyond the pale, and I said things that went too far or made practical jokes that went too far, and that was wrong. And that was because I was an inexperienced producer. I was immature. Wouldn't happen today, but I'm just really sorry it happened. Yeah.
I'm gonna say
I
this.
think immaturity is the word of the day for Dan Schneider, just as a person in general, and his sense of humor and his take on women and running a show and his sense of humor. Immature pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. I'm going to save that clip as a statement for the future when I will be delivering the exact same message to people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I got a little fucking inappropriate sometimes. Okay.
Well, because the other thing they did in the show, they go through all of the horrific Drake Bell stuff, and then they circle back to what a piece of shit Dan Snyder is. And one of the things they start showing is, oh, he would make the workplace so uncomfortable, and he would play these awful practical jokes, and people never knew what they were going to get with him. And they show this clip of him walking up behind somebody, just like when you would stand next behind a door and somebody walks in and you jump out and scare them.
Yeah.
And then, like, he walks up behind the girl from Sam and Cat and just kind of gives her like a jump scare.
Yeah.
And try and paint that like he's a monster for doing that.
Right.
Like everybody's done that forever. You know, that's not something to be like, oh my God, look how he's mistreating these children.
Yeah. But you bring up a good point that maybe we should set the stage, because I really don't cover it here. One of the most notorious things that people say about Dan Schneider is that he has a foot fetish, and he thrust his foot fetish onto children. And one of the things I do, the same way that like we're talking about, you can go back, what you're doing is mining 7 years of content out and bringing up every time they did something to a young girl's feet, or not even girls, like for children. So anytime you did something with it, but like feet are like just naturally gross or whatever. Like you can make that gross. You can make it funny. Clearly we had standards and practices. Like he even brings this up at one point. Yeah, you can create any type of narrative. My favorite part of this was I was looking at Sloan. Like Sloan has covered Dan Schneider extensively. Sloan, Moist Critical, like there's really good shows.
Revenge of the Sis.
There's people who've covered Dan Schneider long before we even got to this. Okay, it's well known that he's kind of a creepy dick. Okay. What I didn't appreciate, like Sloan is like watching it, and this was on the Amanda show, and it's about a hot dog. I can't remember this. It's some goofy name, right? Like they come up with these names that are, almost innuendo or something like that. And Sloan's like, oh, this name was so crazy. And we watch it, and he's just like, and here's another foot joke. And they pull out this fake foot, and like they were like, we made hot dogs out of this foot, and the foot is kind of gross. And he's like, oh my God, that foot, it's another foot joke. This is so nasty. And I'm like, the foot joke is nasty. It's cannibalism. You're eating human parts. So you have a problem with the foot fetish thing, but no problem with the cannibalism. Okay. Like that's where I like have a problem with some of this mining old jokes to create a narrative on why a guy's a creep.
Right. And there was another segment where the SJW talking head on the show is pointing out like what a creep he was, because he was in a hot tub with Amanda Bynes, and Amanda Bynes is wearing a conservative bathing suit, and then Dan Schneider is in the hot tub fully clothed.
Right.
He couldn't
and the bubbles are going, you can't see anything.
Right.
You can see Dan is fully clothed and she's in some bathing suit, but other than like the bubbles are going, you can't, it's not like, sexual at all.
Yeah, the very idea that they would even be in a hot tub together is offensive. Meanwhile, he's fully clothed and doing his best to make it the least creepy that he could. I don't know why I'm defending this guy. I just kind of have a problem when they went after him for things that were trivial and didn't matter. There's enough to go after him for that is significant without pointing out dumb little things that don't fucking matter.
You're exactly right. And that was my biggest problem with it too, is you only weaken your argument by getting too granular with the banal and trying to create this false thing. Like they were saying that the creepy part about that hot tub thing was that they're like, oh, Dan, Dan's like, I wrote this whole thing. Everything that you're saying right now, I wrote. And this whole scenario that we've put ourselves in, I wrote it. It's like, so it almost speaks to the power dynamic of Dan Schneider, that being maybe the more creepy thing than him just being in a hot tub with a 12-year-old or whatever it is. But that's been my biggest problem navigating this whole story is there's plenty of shit to shit on the guy for.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to make it up. You don't have to stretch too far to take this guy to task. So I have one more clip about the writer's room here. So this was about their pay structure. All right. And they were talking about that Dan's a dick because he didn't pay people right either.
Nothing to do with paying writers. I never have. I've never made a writer's deal. It's very simple. There's a common practice in television when hiring writers. If you have a spot for a new writer, sometimes you'll go to two writers and say, hey, if you two new writers for your first job are willing to share a salary, you can both have the job. They have the opportunity to say, yes, that sounds good, or no, no, thank you. In this case, it was two women writers. I've done another show where that teaming was done with two male writers, and they split a salary. I did another show where it was a male and a female writer, and they split a salary.
So here Dan explains how Hollywood and those people that run Hollywood work. It's called paying your dues, dues payer. I was a head writer. Ever heard of the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar roast?
Yeah.
Like, basically what he's saying is, like, you can hire a writing team. If you have partners, you can hire a writing team. What they were doing was putting two strangers together and creating a writing team. And is that kind of unethical? Sure. Did I work for a TV station at one point? I did. You know what they did? Hired part-time people, worked them full-time, and then furloughed them when they got to a point where they would have to start giving them benefits and doing this. Like, is the TV industry fucked up? It is, because everybody wants to be in it, and they can take advantage of in that way. So you can either fucking get with the program or get blackballed out of the industry while your writing partner goes on to have a very lucrative writing career in some of the most popular shows that ever were. But hey, we'll just fucking call this guy an asshole on TV and act like this is the biggest problem with him. So the guy who never hired these people at all, they just happen to work on the show.
Yeah.
But
well, it fits the narrative that Dan Schneider hates women. So
right.
It's very easy to make a point that even though it could have been two men or a man-woman team, the fact that it was two women and one of them sued him for sexual harassment, it's a pretty strong argument that he has a problem with women. You're right, though. It's convenient that it worked out that way, and maybe not a mistake that he treated them like shit because they were women and he thought he was better than them.
Their pay, the way they were paid, was the least of the problems with this.
Right. They were happy to get those jobs. They were happy to make that deal.
Right.
So don't say it was sexist that you jumped at a chance to get that.
Yeah.
Even though you ended up working for a piece of shit that sexually harassed you and blackballed you out of the industry. Yes, I believe all that.
Yeah, and treated you like you weren't as good as everybody else because you're a woman and you're not funny. He definitely did that. I think that's definitely true. And that you're laughing like I meant that as a joke. I'm not meaning that as a joke. He did do that. He comes off very misogynistic throughout the whole thing. Okay, so in our next clip here, which I've called Good Time, Dan is not for everybody.
Hate that anybody worked for me and didn't have a good time. You know me. You've been on my sets. Look, I've had some employees that have worked for me for 10 years, some more than 20 years, who would work with me again, but not everybody. There's still a significant number that didn't have a great time working for me, so my batting average isn't nearly high enough in that area. And the way they wouldn't get the best of me is that I would let the pressure of doing 40 or even more episodes per year, I would let that pressure get to me, which a good boss should never, ever do.
What a great metric for work. It's Monday. I have to commute, clock in, and have a good time. Like, I want to know what kind of pressure these people were putting on themselves to write a sketch where someone picks their nose and then they dump green slime on everybody. Like, calm down, everybody. It's fucking work. Like, you're working on, like, a great fun thing. And you can't, like, okay, the boss is kind of a dick, but the rest of the job's great.
Yeah. How am I going to figure out how to do a double entendre bit of skeeting up Ariana Grande this week?
Yeah. In clip 6 here, which I called Get Specific, Dan was a dickhead.
Specific things that you were doing?
Sure. I would snap at people sometimes. I would be snarky when I could have given them a nicer answer. I would not give people the time that they needed. I would be in too big a hurry to get on to the next thing I had to do. And watching that show, it made me, there were so many times I wanted to pick up a phone and call some of those people and say, I'm so sorry, and let's talk about it. And I wish you'd had a better time, and I wish I could have shown you a better experience.
Yeah.
Andy, you can't get the colorway of Nike Air Maxes that Dan is wearing, okay?
Yeah.
And Dan would rub that in your face on set and say, see these sneakers that have the actual, they haven't actually touched the ground at all? Because, I don't even, walk on the ground. I get in a cart and they drive me to my car, and I get off the cart and get right into my Mercedes and I drive home. You'll never have these shoes, Andy. My shoe game makes your shoe game look like poo game. Shout out to Cousin John. So
the problem that I have with people shitting on him about his demeanor on set, take it back to when the Tom Cruise freak out, when people were not on board with the COVID protocols. Not that I demand that they were, but he was saying that the movie wasn't going to get made unless people follow these protocols. Now he's yelling at people that are fully professional movie industry workers. Now translate that over to a bunch of preteen kids that are probably all hopped up on sugar. They have a lot of money in the bank. They think they can do whatever they want. They're running all around. Then you got the script supervisor that just can't even today and wants to take a half day because she's on her period or whatever. All these personalities and he's trying to run a show.
Right.
And they're like, oh, he snapped at me one day. Well, that's because it's like herding cats on this set.
Yeah.
That was my impression of what it must be like to work on all that. It was probably a living nightmare.
Yeah. Have you ever been around fucking teenagers? God, like it must have been fucking brutal. Like everybody wants something. Do you remember like what's his name on Family Feud?
Richard Dawson.
No, the
Louis
best
Anderson.
One. No. Fucking what's his
Ray
name?
Combs.
God, you're so racist. The black guy.
Oh.
Steve Harvey.
Cedric the Entertainer.
So no, do you remember when Steve Harvey had to put out an email to the whole staff of do not stop me in the hallway to meet your aunt who flew in from fucking Boise and is here to see a taping, and you want her to meet Steve Harvey? Like, no, please don't. Okay.
Yeah. My boss isn't nice enough is not a good criticism of your workspace. Go work somewhere else if that's what your takeaway of your job is. Why my boss was mean to me today. Yeah.
So in this next clip, we're going to talk about the jokes, right, in the revisionist history. And I already kind of talked about this, the cannibalism over the foot joke and everything like that. But what Dan is speaking to here is what everyone would call the overt sexualization of children's feet and things like that.
All these jokes that you're speaking of, that the show covered over the past 2 nights, every one of those jokes was written for a kid audience because kids thought they were funny and only funny. Okay? Now we have some adults looking back at them 20 years later through their lens, and they're looking at them and they're saying, oh, I don't think that's appropriate for a kid show. And I have no problem with that. If that's how anyone feels, let's cut those jokes out of the show.
One of the most disturbing things that I found in the documentary was the African. What I didn't clip in this apology is Dan goes on to champion himself for putting black kids in the show and being involved with Keenan and Kel and how revolutionary he was for including African Americans in it. But in the documentary, the one kid on all that who got 2 seasons and then his mom was considered a problem and removed or whatever, I found that a little more upsetting than they even got to, or like through that. But yeah, this is just there's like a lot of revisionist history. I talked about the foot thing, the gross out, like foundation that Nickelodeon was built on, and gross out humor and everything like that. And it's so easy to go back and pick through this. We've seen this with like Colleen Ballinger and maybe the Paul brothers or something like that, where this generation, we're at a generation now where the kids who watch this shit are growing up and they're going to kill their parents, basically. If you consider Dan Schneider the TV parent of this generation, they're just like, we loved this and it's fucked up, and now we're going to kill it. We're going to kill Colleen Ballinger because she's fucked up. We're going to kill Dan Schneider because he's fucked up, and we're embarrassed we ever liked this shit. That's what it feels like to me.
Kids used to have crushes on whatever. We had a crush on Alyssa Milano, and she was on Who's the Boss.
Right.
But now, whatever, they're going to take April O'Neil from the Ninja Turtles, and instead of being a tall, curvy redhead, she has to be a frumpy, like mixed race, like naughty. You know, she's not a hottie anymore. Yeah. And it's like they have to walk back the very idea of having a crush on Topanga, or the fact that the kids on Nickelodeon maybe looked good for 2 seconds, and that having a kid having a crush on a kid is weird. That's very normal. I don't know why they're like, this is such a problem. Well, maybe for you as an adult that's looking at it, but if a 13-year-old was watching it, they'd probably like it a lot. Now, if it's Brian Peck, who is a 40-year-old man that's trying to make time with Drake Bell, then that's a problem. But kids having crushes on the TV show personalities, I don't think that's weird at all.
You shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize.
Stuff your sorries in a sack, mister.
That's all, that's all.